Did Tamiya's vintage designs influence modern day crawlers and monster trucks? I think so. Hello and welcome back to RC Icons. So the reason for this video was I built my TXT1 a couple of months ago, and it's been sitting in the studio waiting for winter to end so that we can get a running video of it. And of course my original Clod is always on display, so that's always there. And the other day I was thinking about the two of them, and I was like, boy, there's a lot of design cues in those trucks that you see in modern day crawlers slash monster trucks. Not necessarily bashers, as most of those are independent suspension, right? A-arms front and rear. Where these are solid axle. More along the lines of what you see on a crawler or like the LMT. We actually have an LMT, and it's an awesome truck. But you look at the design cues from Tamiya and other manufacturers from back in the day, and you can just see the evolution of these trucks in modern day crawlers and monster trucks. So this is actually the second time I make this video, and you guys are probably all asking yourself, we know that that's a TXT1 and we know that this is an original Clod Buster, but what the hell is that white thing? This is a Killer Krawler 2 from RC 4-wheel drive that was produced around 2018-2019. And it's supposed to be a crawler, but it's just an unbelievable work of art. It's an engineering and CNC marvel. And I've been wanting to get it on the show for a while, but I didn't know how. Until I saw these two trucks kind of sitting side by side, and I was like, holy smokes. I'm like, there's just so many design cues that carry over. So you have the Clod Buster that's motor on axle. This is motor on axle, both front and rear. Front and rear wheel steer, 4-wheel drive with both of them. Front and rear wheel steer, 4-wheel drive with both of them. Cantilevered suspension on the TXT. Quad cantilevered suspension, and I'll explain what that is on the Killer Krawler. Not necessarily a 4-link, but you know, more along the lines, I don't know what you would call it, torsion bar maybe suspension. Not necessarily torsion bar, but you know, it's got the bars coming up from the axles that they're helping to support the front axle. 4-bar for sure. 4-bar here. So just a lot that carries over into this modern day truck slash crawler. Now, 1984, Marui comes out with the Big Bear. Now, that's just a 2-wheel drive, but it's what I would consider a monster truck. Tamiya follows suit essentially in 86 with the Blackfoot. Of course, the Monster Beetle came, so did the Midnight Pumpkin and the Lunchbox. But monster trucks as a whole were just kind of starting their evolution process in remote control. In 1989, Tamiya takes it one step further and releases the Clod Buster. 4-wheel steer, true monster truck size, scale-wise, and the way that it's set up. Solid rear, solid axles, you know, dual suspension on each corner. Motor on axle, so that's not real indicative of like a true, real monster truck. It should be set up more like the TXT, where it had a central gearbox with drive shafts running to both front and rear. But from this platform, it spurred a whole new industry, right? So You have designers like Sassy Chassis and Clodzilla back in the day that basically took this platform and tried to make it a performance-based monster truck and not just a monster truck that kind of toddled around in the yard but didn't drive the best, right? So I'm not saying that Tamiya wasn't watching what some of these outside manufacturers were doing. They obviously were, because it wasn't soon after they released the Juggernaut, which I think was Tamiya's attempt at a performance-based monster truck, but not necessarily didn't turn out to be the best. You know, obviously had some design flaws because it wasn't too long after the Juggernaut 2 came out. But later on, we see the TXT come out. What was it, 2001? So 99 was the Juggernaut. Essentially 2000, maybe halfway through 99, 6 months later, Juggernaut 2. But in 2001, they released the TXT1. Now, I didn't know this at the time. Thank you, Brad Kelman, for sending me the link. But I did this whole video, and I didn't really take into account the fact that Sassy Chassis and Clodzilla and some of these outside manufacturers were out there for Tamiya to be looking at as a way to improve their designs, right? So some of what you see in those aftermarket chassis components morphed into future Tamiya's designs like the TXT1. But the TXT1 is actually goes a little bit further. So Brad had sent me a link to a video called, it's Hemetsky Hobbies is the name of the channel, and it's Kevin Hemetsky, he was the senior editor for Radio Control Car magazine for 20 years. But back when the Juggernaut came out, he was looking to improve it because it wasn't the performance-based monster truck that he was looking for, and he actually designed the TXT1. So it's not necessarily Tamiya's design. It is and it isn't. So they took Kevin's design that he had literally built in his garage, the space-saving chassis, the cantilevered suspension. So Kevin had cantilevered suspension, I believe, in the front and vertical suspension in the back on the prototype. But they ended up at a hobby show together, and Tamiya wanted to see his truck, so he brought the truck along. And then, you know, lo and behold, 2 months later, he was sending his prototype that he didn't even know was a prototype at the time to Tamiya for the designers to work off of to design the TXT1, which is just a crazy story to think about. I mean, yes, he's in the industry. He's a senior editor for Radio Control magazine, but here's a guy that just goes off on his own with a Juggernaut, starts designing a new chassis for it in his garage, mills it. However, I'm sure it wasn't a CNC machine. It was probably a Bridgeport or some kind of a mill back in 2000 or 2000, you know, mills it out of aluminum in his own garage, builds the truck up with Juggernaut axles, transmission, builds it on a cantilevered suspension, and Tamiya loves it so much that they end up putting it into production with a couple of changes here and there. And his truck is now a production truck for Tamiya, right? Just absolutely crazy. They flew him to Japan, the whole 9 yards, to talk about the release of the truck, the livery, what they wanted the body to look like, all that stuff. In fact, somewhere on the truck is his initials. I forget where it is, but KH is on the truck somewhere. I'm not quite sure. It might be HB Racing. That one. That they wanted to put his name on the truck completely, and he didn't want to because, being the senior editor of Radio Control, he thought it might be a conflict of interest, but somehow his initials ended up on the truck. But regardless, so I mean, he obviously deserves credit for the design there, but Tamiya put it into production, and when we look at these trucks today versus a truck from 2018, you're going to see a lot of the same design cues. So what I want to do is bring the camera over. We'll take a look at these two trucks real quick, and how some of those design cues translate into the Killer Krawler. Now, I'm absolutely not saying that RC four-wheel drive ripped their design off from Tamiya. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is there's a lot of design cues that carry through from Tamiya's early designs into something that like this, which what I consider modern, being 2018. Doesn't mean that the same doesn't hold true for Kyosho Designs or some of the other manufacturers. I mean, the USA 1 came out in, I think, 1990, right? So that was a year after, well, the Clod came out in 87, so 3 years later, 3 years after the Clod, Kyosho decided that they needed to throw their hat in the ring. But the USA 1, as cool as it is really just on a double dare chassis, and that's why I had so many problems. Because they took these huge wheels and tires, and it's like putting it on a Blackfoot, right? Without changing anything. It wasn't the best on the hubs, and the way that those axles, they weren't designed for that. So that's the number one failure point on the USA 1. Now, I have a USA 1 to build from New Unboxed, and I'm looking forward to building it, but the design of the USA 1 was never really a robust one. It may have run better than the Clod. I'm not sure. Never run one. Never seen one in the flesh. I just know that the weak point is the way the hub and wheel attachment intersects those solid axles that were really designed for the double dare, which is more of a Blackfoot sized truck with wheels and tires. So completely different. So yeah, let me bring the camera over real quick. We'll take a look at these trucks, and then I definitely want to show you this because it's it's just a work of art. It's crazy, and we'll just take it from there. So when we start off with the Clod Buster, we can see that in '87, Tamiya did it very different from anyone else. They started with a bathtub style chassis. Now this still has all the original radio gear, the mechanical speed control, the whole 9 yards. And it's a beautiful example of a period truck. It needs restoration, it needs to be cleaned. And I know the tires are on backwards, so you get better grip that way. I get blown up in the comments about that all the time. Your tires are on wrong. Well, no, actually they're on right if you want traction. Believe it or not. So bathtub style chassis, and in reality all this upper deck is doing is holding electrics. There's no business end in it at all, right? Everything is underneath. So when we look at the suspension, we see high bit friction shocks and no real articulation in the truck. You know, we see quad shocks in all four corners. Turn it upside down, and we see motor on axle, front and rear. All the gears, everything, no transmission, no drive shafts. Everything is encased inside these axles. So people, even today, will buy a Clod Buster and they'll upgrade it with whatever, the Clod Shop or Clodzilla or any of these aftermarket manufacturers. They'll upgrade the Clod to make it a performance truck, but by the time they're done, the only thing Tamiya they have left is the two axles. They'll even move servos down to the axles and do servo mounted axles, or axle mounted servos, right? And that's because the Clod just is a lumbering truck that does not steer well and doesn't handle well. It's a design from '87, and they had to start somewhere. But like I said, they started a revolution, or an entire industry, because of this truck. One of the most modified trucks or cars Tamiya ever produced. Sand Scorcher probably being number 2. So yeah, just a great truck for '87. Absolutely different from anything else that was offered at the time. And then not too long after, 3 years later, actually it was way later, and they're still making Clods today, left and right. Now it's the Super Clod Buster. They just did the Clod Buster Gray Edition for Tamiya USA, which I think is one of the nicest looking Clods they ever came out with, but the performance hasn't changed. Sorry for my arm being in view. The performance of the truck hasn't changed. So drive this truck from 1987 and put a brand new one next to it and drive that, and they're gonna drive exactly the same. They're not gonna. There's not gonna be anything different about them. Maybe the oil-filled shocks, but they're not shocking too much. There's no movement in the actual chassis. So then they came out with the Juggernaut, which was absolutely better, but still not what we would consider a high-performance truck in today's standards. I don't have a Jug here to show you because mine still hasn't been built. Glenn's going to be building it hopefully sometime soon, but I don't want to put any pressure on him. I have another one that I could build, but I'll just wait, and I'd rather have the one from him. Primarily in the Tamiya Legends livery. That's what I'm most excited about, is to get a Tamiya Legends car / truck / anything in the collection. I think it's going to be cool to have one that my friend built with his livery on it. So the Juggernaut went to an aluminum chassis, side rails, big lumbering aluminum side plates. They were thin, but they were large. And it had vertical oil-filled shocks on it. You could get upgraded shocks for it, which I do have a couple of sets of. But it was a true 4-link in the sense that it had, lower and upper arms to make up the movement of the chassis. But still not quite the performance truck that we were all looking for. And then this whole collaboration with Kevin Hetmansky in Tamiya, and they came out with this beast, which is the TXT, Tamiya Extreme Truck. Now we can see we're getting some suspension travel in there. We're getting some articulation in there. So just totally different. The motors came off of the axles and went into a center gearbox. More indicative of what you see in a real monster truck, where they would have the motor would be mid-mounted or rear-mounted, and then it would be going to a drop-down transfer case or gear reduction, going to 2 drive shafts, going to 2 solid axles. So definitely more of what you would see in a real monster truck. Now, this truck went to servo on axle. Again, twin motors, but on a center gearbox. 4-link with cantilevered suspension, right? So just night and day different, and completely different from anything that we had seen prior. At least in the manufacturing sense of complete kits. You could buy a Quadzilla kit and bolt Clod Buster axles to it and achieve essentially the same thing, but it wasn't offered as a complete truck, so to speak. You were modifying your Clod Buster to the point to where there really wasn't a whole lot of Tamiya left. And I remember seeing the ads in the magazines for Quadzilla chassis kits and sassy chassis kits, and they were epic. They were absolutely awesome. But it was the only way to get the performance you were looking for out of that truck. I love the Clod Buster for what it is and what it represents. You know, it's a lumbering truck, but it's the first one, and it wasn't about performance. It was about fun. And it does put a smile on your face, right? So this one, more performance based, still going to put a smile on your face, albeit a bigger smile. Now we're going to fast forward to 2018, when for some strange reason RC 4-wheel drive decided to design and manufacture this behemoth. So this is a quarter scale crawler, and it's extremely heavy. I may even have to, let's do this, slide this one forward, plop this one behind it. So this is not the body for the truck. So again, quarter scale. This is a 1/10 scale body from Proline. It's their GMC top kick in my infamous Ford white and gold paint scheme. These bodies were discontinued years ago, and I have 5 brand new sitting in my basement that I've been able to hunt down over the years. More of a dually style pickup bed, smokestacks in the back, 4-door top kick front. Absolutely awesome body. So this thing. So this is motor on axle. It's running dual 750 or 760 motors. They're both 16 turn. They're RC 4-wheel drive motors. Absolutely enormous. Enormous. And then it's running 2 servos in the front for steering, 2 servos in the rear for steering. It's running a servo down below for locking differential, and the same on the other side. And it's a symmetrical car in the sense that the front is the back and the back is the front. There's nothing different about the 4 corners of the truck. They're literally quad images of each other. But it's cantilevered in the sense that instead of the springs being on the axle, the springs are on the lower bars and the springs are on the upper bars, on cantilevered arms on the upper bars. So now when you talk about suspension, this whole thing literally will articulate almost 12 inches in total movement. Now, unbelievable for like a crawler scenario, not necessarily what we consider in a monster truck scenario. So that's 3 tires on the table, and that's probably at least a foot on this side. That's how much articulation there is in the truck. Absolutely insane. Now this thing is all CNC machined, every single part. It came as a kit back in 2018 that you had to buy, and you could get it in either black or silver. I liked the raw look of the aluminum, so I got one in silver. A, because it was all I could find, but B, because that's what I liked. Now this thing's a little bit dirty. We do run this thing, although we don't run it a lot. It will pretty much climb over anything. So the wheel and tire combination, because it's a quarter scale, they're 3.0, I think. Yeah, I think they call them a 3.0 series. So the rim diameter is 3 inches. Not the easiest to find. They also came, so the chassis came with a 14 millimeter hex, which is also very hard to find. So a truck of this size, modern day, would be a 17 millimeter hex. So I actually had to buy Proline 14 millimeter hubs, and those weren't easy to find, and to the point to where I bought a few of them when I bought them. I think I have 3 or 4 sets of the hubs downstairs. They do make them in alloy, and they make them in plastic. The set that's on here now is plastic, and I think that's why I'd bought in a bunch. I was afraid of them stripping out. And then I ended up finding some in alloys, which of course would not strip out. So I'm going to pop the camera off the tripod here and reverse you, just so that we can take a better look at this truck, because I can't hold this up for the camera. I have to bring the camera to the truck. So just bear with me for 1 second. Alright, so now when we look at this thing, we see the motor on axle configuration that we see in the Clod Buster. We see steering on axle like we see in the TXT, although this is dual versus single, but it is steering on axle. It's got locking and unlocking diffs. That's what the servo is down here on this arm. It pulls on this arm here, which locks and unlocks the diffs. But then you look at the cantilevered suspension. So this suspension here is not cantilevered. It's on the lower arm. But this upper arm is on a cantilevered bar that goes down to a shock that's down inside here. You can see it there. So when I push down here, you can see that cantilever arm is transferring that force to the shock that's bedded down and below. So quad shock per corner like that, but in a cantilevered scenario like that. So this thing is all CNC machined. All the parts, the scale of this thing is absolutely enormous. Like enormous. All CNC aluminum. I bought this because I saw Medic build one on RC Adventures. And after seeing his build, I was enthralled with just being able to assemble one of these and put it together. I'm actually tempted to take this one apart and build it again just for fun. Just because it was that much fun. So all hex hardware. Everything is machined. All the ball ends are machined. The arms are machined. Just an absolute work of art. And then plenty of movement and play and all the pieces. It's just bushed and bearinged, and all these plates are all CNC machined, and they all screw together and tie together to make up this center chassis. The battery sits here in the middle. I'm running the two 760 motors, and I'll show you from down below here in a second. I have it on a Radio Link 9-channel airplane radio, to be completely honest, but that's because that's what RC 4-wheel drive had spec'd at the time. I'm tempted to put it on a pistol grip and change the way that the rear steer and everything works, just because I don't really like the dual stick for a truck like this. And then, what am I running? A Tekin RX-8 speed control is running both sets of motors, and the motor wires are just paired up. I mean, literally, there's just two blacks coming off of the black post and two reds coming off of the red post. One to the front, one to the rear. And it works fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with the way that it works. I'm actually thinking about putting that RX-8 in the TXT one. Now, we don't use this truck a whole lot. I'm actually toying with the notion of selling it. Well, that's good. It stands up on its own. So when we look at it from underneath, you have these huge plates that are covering the drive axles. But you can see the size of this gearbox is the size of a soda can. That's how big it is. I'm not sure how the power is transferred through this into the wheels to make it turn. It's running CVs front and rear, and the CVs are absolutely huge. Probably 3/4 of an inch. Feels like the diff is locked right now. But yeah, all the knuckles are machined aluminum. The steering arms are separate pieces. Those bolt on from the top. Everything is just machined aluminum. All the bracketry is machined aluminum. It's just absolutely crazy. And huge. Like that piece right there is probably that knuckle or upright. Got to be 1.5 inches across. And then just bottom plate. So yeah, just crazy. I've been wanting to get the Killer Krawler on the show, but didn't know how to do it in a way that made sense for a vintage RC channel. But I think when you start looking at the design of it versus the design of the older Tamiya trucks, you can definitely see the evolution of the monster truck through Tamiya's designs, through Clodzilla's designs, through Sassy Chassis designs, through the Clod Shop's designs, into this RC 4-wheel drive design. These brackets here, I mean, they're huge. They're bigger than like a finger. You know what I mean? They almost look like rockers for the inside of a motor, like a real V8 motor. They're absolutely enormous from RC standpoint. So yeah, that's it. I mean, I just wanted to show you this truck and kind of talk about what was going through my head as I was looking at all of these cars or trucks sitting next to each other. Absolutely awesome. So let me change the view, and we'll close this video out. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. At the very least, you got to see a Killer Krawler 2, maybe for the first time. Maybe you guys have seen that before, I'm not sure. It's not a very common truck. There's not a lot of videos on YouTube about it. But it's definitely one in my collection that I wanted to document on the channel, and this is kind of how I needed to do it. If you're into vintage RC and you're 40 to 55, right, you grew up seeing these trucks progressively get better and better, and the designs of them get better and better, and you witnessed companies like Quadzilla or Clodzilla, Sassy Chassis. You saw the birth of this industry, right? This high performance part industry where we could buy a kit truck like the Clod Buster and make it better with aftermarket parts. It was an absolutely epic time to live through. Whether or not it was still considered a Tamiya or not, that's neither here or there for me. I could care less. I'm really not interested in getting into that argument. We made them better as kids because that's what we wanted our trucks to run. That's how we wanted them to run, right? We wanted to get more out of them. But for Tamiya to continuously up the ante and change the design to try to get better performance out of these trucks is absolutely awesome. Now, were they watching what was going on in the industry? Yeah, absolutely they were. It's characteristic when you look at the Juggernaut from the Clod Buster and then the TXT from the Juggernaut. Now, granted, they had help with Kevin's design on the TXT, but they also took it one step further and went to the TXT2, which is probably a better truck than the TXT1. They got rid of the cantilevered suspension. They went back into a vertical state. You know, they changed things, tweaked things here and there. But absolutely, those designs from those early days are still apparent today, and in a lot of the crawlers, I would say more than anything, of today's market, right? So the Killer Krawler 2 didn't have a long life, ran from 2018 to 2019. But it was a lot of money. I mean, you were spending $1,000 on a chassis kit. You didn't get wheels and tires, you didn't get a body. The body that came with it, or you had to buy for it, was a Ford pickup truck body, but it was 1/10 scale going on a 1/4 scale truck. It needed to be that way because the amount of articulation a truck had, you just would never... You put a 1/4 scale or a 1/5 scale body on this thing, and then you're going to have rub like crazy just because of how much movement you have in the rear end and front end. I mean, you're just going to come up and hit the body. So the only way they could get the clearance to work was to put a 10th scale truck body on it. Looked a little bit funny in the advertisements when you looked at the truck, but you understood it once you had it in front of you. The Dominator tires, wheels and tires that came with the truck were probably twice as wide as this. They were absolutely enormous, huge. And by the time they had discontinued the chassis and I had gotten this one, you couldn't find the body kit and you could not find the wheels and tires. The body came pre-painted black with all kinds of like real flames on it. It was awesome. I wish I could find one because it would be a body to have on display. But I couldn't find wheels and tires, so I went with RC 4-wheel drive wheels and tires. These are mudslingers in a 3.0, but you can get mudslingers for the Clod. They make them the same size as Clod, and they're absolutely unreal. They might even make mudslingers for the X-Max too, I'm not sure. But these just have tons of grip. As far as a crawling tire, they're my favorite. I've got them on almost every one of my 10th scale crawlers as well. But yeah, just crazy. We've been blessed to live in a time where we've been able to see all of this evolution from the old to the new. Now, I love the old, but it does not run like the new. I love the new as well. I've got all new age stuff. I've got way more vintage than I do new age stuff, but I have got an X-Max, we've got a Creighton, we've got an LMT, we've got, you know, it's part of RC, right? It's I don't just go out and run old stuff. I run construction equipment, I run semi-trucks, I run new age bashers and crawlers, and then I run my vintage stuff. I just love it all. So you'll have to let me know in the comments what you think what are your thoughts? I mean, what did you witness? What did you see as the Tamiya trucks evolved, but from the other manufacturers as well? Am I right about the USA one, the original? I know they just did new versions of the USA one, but I don't know how robust those are either. But I know the original one, everybody complained of breakages in the hubs. Number one weak spot was the interaction between that hub and big wheel and the double dare arms. Kyosho probably should have done it on a more robust chassis instead of just trying to use a chassis they already had. They probably should have just designed something specific. If I'm not mistaken, that one's wheel on, motor on axle as well. So, just totally different. And then the other thing, just before I let you go, when you look at competition crawlers from today, so I'm trying to think, Axial had done one back in the day that was motor on axle. I think was it G-Made? There's a bunch of competition crawlers. I haven't been crawling in a while, so I forget the names, but there was like 2 or 3 really high-end competition crawlers that all came motor on axle. Just very different and unique way to power it. And primarily the reason why they did that is you could overdrive or underdrive a truck very easy because you're using 2 different motors, one in the front, one in the rear, but you didn't have hang-up with drive shafts. And you didn't have to worry about slipper clutches and transmissions, right? Just took a lot of the breakages in competition crawling out of the picture with motor on axle. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys like it. Let me know in the comments what you think of all this stuff, and if I'm just crazy, that's fine too. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give me a thumbs down. It's okay. If you're not already a subscriber, I'd ask you to consider subscribing to support the channel. It does help. It helps to get us out there as far as the algorithm goes. If you do decide to subscribe, make sure that you turn your all notifications bell on so that you're notified whenever I release a video. We've got a ton of great stuff coming. Spring's about to hit, and I think I've got like 14 cars ready to run. This one being one of them, and we'll probably get this one on film at the same time. Not in the same video, but we might as well show the Killer Krawler toddling around. It's not a fast truck, it's a crawler, but it does climb over anything. Wood piles, whatever, doesn't matter. It just hooks up with those locking diffs and those monster wheels and tires. So, until next time, with the next RC Icon, we'll see you soon. Thanks.
You